Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, what can we say about this development with respect to Donald J. Trump? One of the things that had brought him to the forefront during the electoral process was just this readiness on his part to go to social media, particularly his favorite brand of social media, or his favorite outlet of social media being that of Twitter, to say these outlandish things, to basically go out and embrace a type of bravado which he thought might help propel him to an even greater period or greater sense of power and control than he would have had otherwise. And what it tells us is there is this, attribute of him that utilizes the latest and greatest aspects of technology that left some of his opponents in the dust, some of his rivals in the dust, just because they didn't know how to utilize it to the same degree and with the same effectiveness that he was able to. But it also tells us that he lacks any modicum of restraint. And one of the things that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is that when you are dealing with an office, a political office, that wields as much power as that of the chief executive of these United States of America, and particularly when you consider that the way that the reins of power are being wielded in such a form that it is completely distanced and divorced from the way that our founding fathers had originally intended it at the inception or conception of our nation some 235 plus years ago, restraint becomes a necessary attribute. Because if you abuse the power going into the highest office in the land, you're already engendering a sense of distrust. You are already operating from a sense that you are taking a position that is diametrically opposed to the hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. And of course, I'm speaking of none other than we the people, ourselves. We are the ones that are in charge of this. And we are the ones who have to act in a way that makes sense and is in line with the true fundamental characteristics and attributes of our republic. So why would I focus so much attention on Trump's just seeming readiness and willingness to just run and shoot off with his stubby little thumbs on the Twitter sphere against American business and industry? Well, we know that his entire shallow, hollow, empty, and meaningless platitude that constituted the slogan, the campaign slogan of the Trump team, was that of Make America Great Again, or as it has been ridiculously shortened to, MAGA. MAGA. We're going to MAGA. But here's the thing. America never ceased being great. I know that we've reiterated this point on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, almost to the point of it being ad nauseum. But it is the truth. We have never once ceased being a great nation and people. We are still governed by the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution. That part, which is the only thing that really defines us, is the only thing that literally lets us be great, is something that he ignores. But the other aspect of quote-unquote making America great again is that you would want to see America flourish. and find itself restored onto the path of prosperity. But in order for that to become a reality, you have to know what made America prosperous in the first place. In fact, that was one of the great rebuttals that Texas Senator Ted Cruz had for Donald Trump and his surrogates back during the primary process. It's one that didn't get the sort of attention that it should have from the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And of course, we all know the reason why that played out the way it did, and the reason that it came to fruition was because the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media were deliberately attempting to get Donald J. Trump to clinch the nomination for the gutless opposition party, or GOP. And their reasoning behind that was that they thought that he would be the easiest candidate for their frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist acolyte, which happened to be Hillary Rotten Clinton, to defeat. All of the polling certainly seemed to suggest that at the time. And the election was closer than it would have been had it been any of the other plethora of candidates that were vying for the gutless opposition party nomination. And so when we see that it plays out in that way, we see that there is this sort of bamboozlement that was attempting to go forth. We see that there were these relentless efforts to try and empower Trump at that time so that they could ultimately turn against him and try and slaughter him during the general election. Of course, that didn't play out quite to the tune that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism thought. They underestimated the power and ability that Trump's stubby little thumbs could have by going to the sphere of social media, particularly the Twitter sphere, because that is his favorite above all others, to have instantaneous communication, and he thereby, through embracing these ridiculous and uncorroborated conspiracy theories, think back to trying to say that Ted Cruz's father was somehow inexorably linked with or involved with the assassination of JFK and Lee Harvey Oswald, thanks to that National Enquirer piece, which is nothing short of a tabloid piece. Think of the way that he brought up Hillary Clinton's health while ignoring his own. All of these things show us that one of the things that we have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is absolutely true. And that point is this, that perception, particularly in the arena of American politics, more often than not matters more than reality. This is why candidates work so hard to develop a particular image. This is why they have a team of public relations officers whose sole duty, obligation, and objective is to basically monitor the pulse of the American people so that they can keep their respective candidates on target. Trump didn't have to do that. Trump operated from a notion that he understood that Hillary Clinton was that unpopular, that she was that disliked, and that in that way he could say any outlandish thing, thereby garnering himself even more free airtime. Because if you recall, he got more free airtime than any of his opponents, irrespective of whether that was occurring during the primary process or during the general election cycle. And why that came to the forefront is because, particularly with Hillary, it was of her own making that he got more airtime. She made the just blunderous miscalculation that she didn't have to do anything. That Donald J. Trump was such an outlandish candidate that nobody in their right mind would have supported him. That nobody with a modicum of sanity or sense would have supported him. But the problem is, nobody with a modicum of sanity or sense would have supported her either. And that is what allowed the Lion Branch Trumpidians, who continue to congregate in their Trumpidian tabernacle, to come forth with this line of, yeah, but Hillary. Now, I know that we mentioned all throughout the primary process that whenever you tried to point out the consistent inconsistencies that had been peddled by the now president-elect, his acolytes and his surrogates would rush forth with the argument of, yeah, but Trump. In fact, I believe that that argument was originally made by Stu on Glenn Beck. It was either Pat or Stu. But they made that argument, and they spoke as to how these people had essentially allowed themselves to be drawn out into the most dangerous attribute that is literally incompatible with the way that our system of polity works, and that is the danger of groupthink. You see, we in the United States of America are based off of a set of fundamental pillars, a true set of fundamental pillars that are self-accountability, working with self-responsibility, and that those things taken in unison or tandem give us self-determination. You see, our founding fathers had to face the weight of the world. They went against the most well-organized, best-equipped, most powerful military force known to man during the late 18th century, that of the armed forces of the Empire of Great Britain. And they did it based on a core set of principles and philosophies, what we refer to as the natural law. Again, the natural law essentially states that this is a set of laws that is universally applicable to humanity, and that can also be universally understood by the simple, rote application of logic and reason. In fact, it was Thomas Aquinas, that Catholic philosopher, who said that it is God's law inscribed on the hearts of mankind. Now that's amazing. It's amazing because it speaks to what it is that these United States of America were devoted to from their inception some 235 plus years ago. That is something that we cannot ignore. But when you look at the way that the 2016 election cycle played out, we see that the natural law tenets did not get much attention, other than as a way of trying to ridicule those of us who seek to have the government adhere to them. And this came from both sides of the political aisle. Well, now that we are entering into the new year, the year of 2017, we have to ask ourselves whether Trump can adjust away from this bloviating blowhard that had gained the love of the so-called deplorables and can transition to what is expected of anyone who assumes the role of Commander-in-Chief of the United States and Chief Executive of the United States. For you see, when you realize that the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours is we the people, that means that all of the governing power and authority that is wielded and exercised by the federal government, which is limited by its nature, must be, in turn, a servant to the people. That means that you have to have a modicum of control. It means that even if you didn't vote for someone or didn't receive someone's vote, that you are still operating in a representative capacity of that person by right of that person's citizenship to these United States of America. Now, one of the greatest failings of the Barack Hussein Obama regime was that he did not go out of his way to try and represent all Americans. He tried to just represent the radical, leftist, frothing-at-the-mouth, Fabian socialist strain that had dominated the Democrat Party. And part of that is why we saw Trump get some of the votes that he did. It was these disenfranchised, blue-collar, at one time strong voice for the Democrats in white, blue-collar, working-class people in the Rust Belt. Now, the way that Trump managed to convince them to get on board the quote-unquote Trump train was to convince them that his policies would bring business back to the United States without any question, without any hesitation, that he would do things personally that would restore them. And I'm reminded of how this played out with the carrier deal, because that is nothing short of crony corporatism, something that true dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionists oppose, because it is the impermissible entanglement of the public sector with the private sector, thereby allowing the government to choose winners and losers within American business and industry. And that is not something that lines up with the foundational image that our founding fathers had conjured up during the birth throes of this nation some 235 plus years ago. In fact, it stands in direct and polar opposition to what our founding fathers were attempting to achieve and build. But that doesn't matter, because we have, as a nation and people, embraced the get-rich-quick type scheme. We've fallen for the types of platitudes that brought about fraudulent results such as Trump University. It's because we expect instant gratification and we are unwilling to take a step back and objectively monitor a situation, objectively monitor the things that are unfurling before our very eyes, because we want it and we want it now. And nothing else matters. Nothing else comes to the epicenter. But again, it draws us directly back to what that great founding father of ours, Samuel Adams, said was required for our republic to be robust and successful. And of course, what I'm speaking of is how he had stated that the only way for the United States to truly be a great and world-changing republic was for the people to be virtuous, for us to operate with a high moral standard, caliber, and fiber. Now, I know that I've had dear friends of mine say that when it comes to some of these questions and concerns and these disagreements that I have levied against President-elect Trump, that I am just basically unfairly holding him to such a high standard of honesty that I'm not even holding myself to. But the fact of the matter is, even if I was not holding myself to a particular standard, as is required of me as an officer of the court, it still wouldn't matter. Because my role, duty, obligation, but above all responsibility in my capacity as a sovereign citizen of the United States is to vet the president and to proactively maintain and safeguard my fundamental and inalienable rights which were endowed to me by my Creator, the God of nature. That is the same duty, obligation, and responsibility that all of us have in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in the United States. That is simply the truth. That is simply something you cannot escape from. It is something you cannot ignore. And it really has come to that point. It is an ugly point that we see. But it's because we have lost touch with the ability to engage in civil discourse that I think really works to us. And it really must be something we work to address. We have to once again see that there is more that unifies us as a nation and a people than divides us. That we work to achieve greater things. That the entire purpose of our nation, the entire identity of our nation is greater than the sum of its parts. And that falls directly back to the natural law tenets. And it really does come to a point that we must, as a nation and a people, work towards this goal of understanding who we are and what we want to achieve. But when you see the way that Donald Trump has gone forth, using his stubby little thumbs to go to the Twitter sphere to attack American industry for the purpose of basically creating this type of false narrative, this perception, which again, oftentimes, more often than not, matters more than reality in the arena of American politics, to try and convince those that had voted for him in the Rust Belt to support him, come hell or high water, to support him irrespective of what he might say or do. And so what he did is first we saw it with Boeing. We saw that he complained and said basically that billions of dollars were being wasted. He basically pulled a number straight out of his posterior to try and say that is what Boeing was doing. Boeing was intentionally gouging the United States to try and better themselves. But if you think back to one of the things that he had said all throughout the primary process, when people demanded that he release his income tax returns, or to explain his less than savory business tactics and strategies, he said that, well, and particularly with his bankruptcy, well, I was just playing by the rules. I was using the system to my advantage. So it's okay for him to do it. And now that he is in a position that he will be wielding the reins of political power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, no, it's not okay for everyone else to do that. But it turned out that the numbers that he was throwing out was not even close to reality. And in that instant that he went to the Twitter sphere, using his stubby little thumbs to create that message that he did, he caused the stock in Boeing to plummet. Now granted, Boeing was able to recoup the losses, but it still serves as a dire warning to show that if you lack constraint and you have a bully pulpit as loud as that of the office of President of the United States of America, you can consider Twitter to be an amplifier for it. Something that just ratchets up the volume. And it cannot be allowed to be utilized with reckless abandon to where it harms shareholders and potentially employees of those companies. Well, it didn't stop there. We see that it also occurred with the F-35 Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter program by Lockheed Martin. We see that Trump once again said that, well, there's going to be competition for this. And again, it was designed to lessen the value of the stocks of that publicly traded company. But if we compare this to how Trump runs his own business, because I can already hear the shrill, discordinal, and disharmonious tones of the Lion Branch Trumpidians congregating together in their Trumpidian tabernacle to say that, well, you know, he's a goodly businessman, he greatly knows bigly things and does things that nobody else does or knows. But why is it that none of his companies are publicly traded? Well, it's because there are questions about how he did his financing. There are questions about how he literally ran his businesses. And again, that is not something that can be ignored. That is not something we should ignore. But when it comes to the Lion Branch Trumpidians, they attempt to ignore it each and every time because they cannot bear the thought of there being anything negative said towards their chosen leader. And I think part of the dangerous trend that ties into that is that they project their own self-value, their own self-worth, but above all their own self-identity onto the candidate that they chose to support for President of the United States. And therefore, it's as though you are personally attacking them. You see, they're unable to disconnect their emotional response to it. They are unable to disconnect that he is not them. And that's part of the danger. That's part of the reason why George Washington warned in his farewell address that we should not allow ourselves to break down into disparate and competing factions, because we would lose sight of the overarching objective of these United States of America. And you can find that overarching objective in the clear and concise language contained within the preamble to the Constitution. And that is that we, the people, created the government. That we, the people, are the ones that delegated certain powers and authorities for the government to enact laws, to execute the laws, and to judge the laws. But we have also created the Constitution to ensure the domestic tranquility, to ensure that we can secure the blessings of liberty, not only for our generation, but for those up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born. That is our role. That is what we are supposed to do. But how do you do that when you have inexorably linked your own self-value, worth, and above all, identity with a man who has now been placed in charge of government? That is the danger of a cult of personality. And I know that everybody wants to sit there and say that it is, bad form to try and look through the sands of time and point out an example of history where there are dire warnings that tell us of this exact type of scene and scenario. But if we do turn back the sands of time and go back to the collapse of Weimar Germany and the rise of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party, in 1933, one of the slogans that Adolf Hitler had appropriated to try and convince Germans of all walks of life to support him was that of Ein Reich, Ein Volk, and Ein Führer. There's one government, there's one people, and they are all under one leader. That is how they do it. And it just is bizarre. It really is. Because it tells us that if you buy into a cult of personality, you can so easily be misled by those who have the reins of power. And Hitler was very, very selfish with power. He did not want to share it. He did not want the people to have it. And that's why one of the first things that he did was move to strip and deprive his citizens of their right to keep firearms. It's why he pushed to assume control of German health care, thereby creating socialized universal health care. And he operated in such a way as he wanted the people to project their own self-value and worth, their own self-identity onto him, because the next line that was cooked up by his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, was that individually, you're weak, but as part of the Third Reich, you are strong. Now, when you stop and examine this with objectivity, you can come to the conclusion that this sort of chicanery stands in opposition to those fundamental pillars that I mentioned earlier that make up the root basis of America: self-responsibility, self-accountability, working in tandem to give us self-determination. Well, essentially what Germany was doing at that time was that they were not wanting to have self-determination. All determinations were to be made by the state. And that is kind of the attitude that we saw come to fruition, when we saw both President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Mike Pence there in Indianapolis, Indiana, singing the praises of that corporatist crony deal with Carrier. Now, Trump had originally gone forth into the Twitter sphere using his stubby little thumbs to announce that, there's going to be hell to pay, and I'm going to make sure that those jobs don't leave. Lo and behold, the workers that were there in Carrier took him literally. Now, you know that's one of the things that the Lion Branch Trumpidians have reiterated at every given and available opportunity is that, the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media made the mistake of taking Trump literally. He's just saying things. He's just communicating it in a base fashion so that we can understand it. And therefore, he's just calling it as it is. He's a straight shooter. Except that at some point, this lame, harebrained style of excuse is going to wear thin. And already I see that they are assuming one of the arguments that we found so just trite with the cult of personality that had built around Barack Hussein Obama during his first term, and even into his second term of office. Yeah, but Bush. Any problem we have is directly related to George W. Bush. Well, now, it was, yeah, but Trump. He's going to make America great again. Then it was, yeah, but Hillary. Yeah, Trump may not be that wonderful, but, Hillary. Now it's, yeah, but Obama was worse. Well, where does this stop? Where does this line of faulty reasoning finally end? Because when you stop and think about it, under the totality of the circumstances, such an approach is a dangerous one. It is one that disregards the danger that could happen irrespective of what political party the highest office holder in the land has. The type of power that he is able to exercise, wield, and exert, it is staggering and astronomical. It's one of those types of things that we should be cognizant and wary of. Because when you stop and think about it, what he is capable of doing when he is acting with unfettered and unrestrained power is he can unravel the entire societal fabric of these United States of America. That was part of the complaint that we had with Barack Hussein Obama. We said that the executive branch of government had distanced and divorced itself too far from the powers that were expressly and specifically enumerated unto that office by the clear and concise language contained in the four corners of our Constitution. But in particular, what Article 2 says, as it is Article 2 that basically enumerates the very limited powers of the president. Basically, to faithfully execute the laws of the land and to be commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States. That is it, essentially. But we see that if we allow ourselves to have the president assume near dictatorial type of powers, where the president mainly goes out and says, I, me, that it is all concentrated within my stubbly, smally hands, that, too, goes against the fundamental strains of who we are both as a nation and a people. And it is a path that we can ill afford, particularly when you recall that the United States, as I sit here right now speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, is in the midst of an identity crisis coupled with a slew of constitutional crises. It is certainly a path I do not believe we can afford to take. Because if we let go of who we are as a nation and a people, then we are allowing ourselves to hand over the reins of power to someone who is going to besmirch, belittle, abridge, and infringe upon our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And if you recall, one of the messages that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and yours truly as well, has been drumming over and over again on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it's that without our rights, we are truly left with nothing. It leaves us in a precarious, untenable, unsustainable scenario and situation. And again, we must overcome these hurdles, obstacles, and adversities. And so, why would I mention this with respect to Trump and his tweeting against American business and industry? When surely what he's doing is trying to bring jobs back to America, trying to restore America's industrial might. The problem is that the way that he's going about it, using nothing but a massive stick to threaten punishment for these companies that more oft times than not had sent these manufacturing jobs overseas in order to maintain the bottom line, in order to be competitive against their global and domestic competition, and to be able to deal with or to get around the whole constraints of our draconian and overbearing, brutally burdensome corporate tax system, which is the highest in the free world. Our corporate tax rate is the highest in the industrialized world. They sought to go where they could, have the labor that they needed to sustain viability. And of course, there is a strain of rampant hypocrisy that attaches with this when you recall that Trump himself had sold all of his followers those trinkets and goodies, particularly the red MAGA hats, that were manufactured where? Detroit, Michigan? Indianapolis, Indiana? New York? Dallas, Texas? Hollywood, Florida? Or Miami, Florida? Or Orlando, Florida? Atlanta, Georgia, Los Angeles, California, Portland, Oregon, Spokane, Washington, Seattle, Washington, Montana, in any of our states, in any of our cities? No. They were manufactured in the People's Republic of China. Why? Because that is where he could get the cheapest deal. That is how he could ramp it up a profit from it. And if we recall that one of the things he had said, now almost 17 years ago, back in 2000, when he was first speculating or, sending out a trial balloon of this idea of running for the office of President of the United States, he said that he would be the first presidential candidate to actually make money off of running for president. Now, I know that the Lion Branch Trumpidians are going to continue to spin this in such a way as to say, well, that's just a sign of what a greatly, bigly, wonderfully businessman he is. And that is how we will ensure that our nation will be restored to the path of prosperity. That's how you MAGA. It really does sound like some disgusting and disturbing sort of dance, but that's not quite true. Because if you go back to what it was that Sam Adams said, and he ought to know, as he was of our founding fathers, he was there on the front line when our long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence was actually unfurling before the eyes of the world, said that we must be a virtuous people. And someone who is living by a code of honor, who has a code of conduct, would lead by example. Is that not what we would expect our leaders to do? Is that not what we would require of our elected leaders? It is if we want America to be a strong, robust, but above all free nation, as it was always originally intended to be, dating back to its inception some 235 plus years ago. But do we see Trump mention that? No. In fact, we even see the Congress, in an attempt to obfuscate the truth and to limit some of the impact that Trump is feeling for his own ethical concerns and questions, attempt to get rid of the Office of Ethics in the United States Congress. This should be a sign of foreboding. It is a foreshadowing circumstance of what is probably going to be a very predictable pattern for the looming 4 years that are coming around the corner. And I wish that that weren't the case. I wish that we had the ability right now to step back from it all and try and reevaluate where it is that we're headed and what it is that we're supposed to be doing both as a nation and as a people. Unfortunately, we are not taking that step. We are not looking at this with a modicum of objectivity. Because if you're a frothing at the mouth leftist, you're upset that here's a guy who is essentially slowly walking in the sorts of policy plans and positions that your darling, whether it was Vermont Senator Noidface Boing Me Sanders or Hillary Rotten Clinton, you think it's the wrong person implementing it. But it doesn't mean you disagree with it. And then if you recall that one of the things that Trump had told incoming minority leader Chuck the Schmuck Schumer that he liked him better than he liked people in his own party. And yes, he was playing that as he was speaking about the Senate Majority Leader Mitch the Turtle McConnell. Irrespective of what you think of McConnell, and you know we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, do not think much of the Kentucky snapping turtle. We just don't. You don't go forth and give the opposition that sort of political narrative and soundbite that they can use for their own propagandist narrative and agenda. Unless, of course, your intent is to strengthen the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. And of course, what Jeremy and I have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is that is exactly what Trump is wanting to do. Because Trump has, for the vast majority of his 70 years spent on God's green earth, espoused and adhered to and supported and funded those types of nefarious plots, schemes, and machinations that are designed to destroy and annihilate the United States, both as a nation and people. Now, where is the conservative punditry with respect to this? Where are those voices that are supposed to be the stalwart voices in the night as a guiding beacon, as a lighthouse to drive us away from the rocks of tyranny, despotism, and oppression? Why, instead of being those types of voices, they've become a siren song, adding to the tune of the Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives to continue this drastic, permanent, fundamental, and if we are not careful, irreparable transformation of the conservative movement to some sort of alternative right scheme, that of national identity and definition, being based on barbaric notions of tribalism. Again, if we are going to ever hope to restore America to prosperity, it is going to have to be based on law. Based on the natural law tenets that form the cornerstone of not only our shared United States Constitution, but also our federalist, representative, republican form of government. There really is no way around that. Of course, the Lion Branch Trumpidians don't want us to consider it. They don't want that to be the approach that we take. And therefore, they sit there and they come up with these derogatory terms such as cuckservative. They attempt to continue to drive a wedge into the body politique of these United States of America, thereby implementing and employing the same tried and true, albeit threadbare tactics and strategies of divide and conquer that has been championed by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists for over a century and a half now. And of course, the Fabians aren't going to be that bothered by this because they think that they can topple it. And meanwhile, the tearing this nation apart at its societal seams, which is exactly the end goal that they had set for themselves, is going on unabated. In other words, the alt-right and the Trump surrogates are going for and accomplishing the end goals in Machiavellian fashion that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have set for themselves going back some 150 plus years. And when you stop and think about that, and you recall that they operate under the narrative that was set up by Kat Sunstein, who said, never let a crisis or tragedy go to waste, you see that they are going to fan the flames of malcontentment for all that it's worth. That they are going to continue to pit American citizen against American citizen in the hopes that we tear out each other's jugulars and bleed this nation white, anemic, so that we're weak and cannot stand up to the diabolical, dark, and twisted machinations that they are hoping to rot forth in this nation. Because again, the standard bearers of liberty, the front line of defending our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights is we the people, by the very inherent and innate design of our constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic. That is how it must be. But do you see anybody acknowledging that? Do you see Rush Limbaugh acknowledging that? Or do you see him bowing down at the altar of the Golden Quaff to kiss the hair ring with respect to, well, it's going to be like FDR, and FDR had created a majority for the Democrat Party for decades? Is that what it's about? Is that living in the same type of framework that Sam Adams said that we had to? When he said that in order for us to be a robust and thriving republic, that we must be a virtuous people? That's not the way I'm seeing it. That's not the way that it plays out for me. That's certainly not what appears to be realistic. Instead, what I'm seeing is that this is clamoring to join the Me Too type of mentality that has weakened the United States of America in generation after successive generation, and that works to our great detriment each and every time that it is implemented, attempted, and utilized. But the American people are better than this. The American people have always managed to see the overarching and greater good that our nation stands for and represents, and thereby has overcome every hurdle, obstacle, and adversity that has ever been placed in their path in our relatively brief yet illustrious history traversing God's green earth. The problem is, we find that our national heritage, character, spirit, but above all identity, has come under a well-orchestrated and relentless and ceaseless attack. We're so caught up in the quagmire of attempting to maintain the quality of life that we have managed to carve out for ourselves that it is easy for us to lose sight of what it is that these nefarious forces that stand in direct opposition to us are attempting to achieve. And ultimately, what it is that they are seeking to achieve is to weaken us, to drive us further astray, to further distance and divorce ourselves from the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And in so doing, they will make it easier for the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born, to accept this new type of mediocrity that they are hoping to impose on us. They will make them malleable, bendable, shapeable, manipulative, so that they fit the goals of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. And don't think that they are not waiting for their next opportunity to strike. This is part of the danger that I've seen developing during this time of euphoria that has gripped the disillusioned conservatives who think that now their nation is suddenly magically back onto a good path. Oh, the liberals are dead forever. The socialists have been dealt the coup de grace, or the final death blow, and this is something that they will never be able to recover from. Do not operate from that point of mind. That frame of mind is one that will doom you to failure each and every time. Why? Because it is the same type of underestimation that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists made with the so-called right. They said that the Republican Party was doomed thanks to the shifting demographics that has come to the forefront. Thanks to those shifting demographics, white people could never hold a position. All of that, again, delving into this ridiculous and contrite notion of identity politics. And you see that that's what drives them. That's what motivates them. That is what they think. You recall that Obama had said that systemic racism is just an intrinsic and inherent part of the national DNA of these United States of America. That's literally what they believe. That is literally the outlook that they have for themselves. Now, the appropriate response to that is, no, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men, meaning all people, are created equal. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing a mirror image, a grotesque carnival house mirror that distorts everything, reflection of that type of identity politics being embraced by the so-called alternative or alt-right, or as we prefer to refer to them here at Radio Aviation Excellence, as the alt-right. They embrace this tribalist notion of nationalism, this tribalist definition of nationalism, and thereby they are engaging in identity politics. Again, disregarding and ignoring those dire, sagacious warnings of George Washington, the father of our nation, in his farewell address. We have essentially allowed ourselves to break down into disparate and competing factions, and in so doing we have lost sight of what it is that propelled us to such lofty heights during our relatively brief yet illustrious history. Again, that is not something that can be ignored. That is something that we must grapple with, that we must come to terms with if we ever hope to restore the United States back onto the path to prosperity. Now, I know that that is far easier said than done. I know that it is a difficult task for us to set ourselves upon, but we're going to have to do it if we really do want to see our nation thrive again. And of course, the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media The historical revisionists that infest our ivory towers of education from coast to coast and border to border are not going to discuss this. They're going to ignore this. They're going to sit there and try and say that we brought this about, that it somehow constitutionalists that empowered this ugly sort of 1930s European racialist drivel to come to fruition and to manifest itself in the confines of the United States of America. But we all know that nothing could be further from the truth. You see, this is essentially the pot calling the kettle black. This is essentially the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists trying to rewrite history, trying to dupe and bamboozle the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And they are going to do this over and over again until it reaches the point of ad nauseum, because that is the way that they have developed their system and have been attempting to exercise and utilize and implement their system for over a century and a half now, folks. This is the danger that we face. This is the sort of dark and twisted machination, and their modus operandi is to continue to double down on these efforts. Because the way they see it, this is drawing them closer to victory. They see a light at the end of the tunnel, and they think that that means that their victory is within grasp. But it does not have to be that way. We, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, can put our foot down. We can restore this nation. But in order to do that, we are going to have to unlock the chains and shackles that have been impeding our progress, that have been holding us back for decade upon successive decade, generation upon successive generation. And the only thing that will do that is something that has been with us since the inception of our republic 235 plus years ago. And of course, that thing of which I speak is none other than the supreme law of the land that is our shared United States Constitution. That great and wonderful document is what allowed us to become the strong, free, robust, and compassionate people that we are and have always been. But again, this is going to require that we proactively go forth and attempt to maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable rights, which happen to be endowed to us by our Creator, who is none other than the God of nature himself. In other words, we must reject the contrite notions, the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism, because they have been utilized as weapons to bludgeon the nation and to bludgeon the people, and to ignore what it is that makes us a strong and robust nation and people. Why would we embrace that? Why would we assume the mantle of that when that is nothing short of the mantle of death, depravity, and destruction? It's because we are being led astray. It's because we have been enamored with a carnival barker's showmanship type tactics. But it's commander-in-chief, not showman-in-chief. It's the leader of the free world, not the actor on the stage of the world. Unless and until we are willing to bring ourselves back from the precipice of this sort of chicanery, we will continue to see these problems continue unfettered. They will accelerate exponentially. And the actions by either side of the political aisle will merely exacerbate these problems. And when Trump goes out there and essentially lies about the manufacturing of General Motors Chevy Cruze. He tried to say that there ought to be a border tax, that they were manufacturing them in Mexico and then shipping them back into the United States. GM went forth and basically retaliated to this reckless tweet that was put forth by President-elect Trump and said, no, all of the Chevy Cruze models that are sold and consumed in the United States are manufactured in Ohio. So once again, we see that the President-elect went forth and tried to spin the narrative, tried to create this type of perception, to make that matter more than reality, to set forth a propagandist goal, narrative, and agenda, and to bamboozle the American people. And it was designed, again, to try and hurt their stocks. Now, General Motors is certainly not in this arena with clean hands. We know that they accepted the blood money that was the money of the bailouts. But the bailouts had started under George W. Bush. They were continued under the tutelage of Barack Hussein Obama, and we said then that we didn't want the government picking and choosing winners and losers within the private sector. I thought that that was one of the primary major motivators and proclamations against the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. That was one of the things that united us in our opposition to this Fabian socialist attempt to galvanize government and to further implement the strains of power within the hands of government. Of course, in the end, who is it that loses ultimately? At the end of the day, after all of this sort of chicanery is allowed to go forth unfettered, unimpeded, it's we the people. It's our constitutionally endowed, federalist, representative, Republican form of government that is ultimately the one that loses out in the end. And we can't afford that. And we just can't. Because if we are to restore American pride and prosperity, and to ensure that the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born, can exercise their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights without fear of governmental ramifications and repercussions, we cannot afford to cede 1 inch of our rights and of our ability to be self-determinant, because that will be utilized to enslave us. That's what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are literally hoping to achieve. That is what they have set their mind to, and they are not about to back down from that. And don't just, convince yourself that Trump is going to be some sort of an impediment to that he will serve as a roadblock to that. Because he himself wants government power. That's what his reckless tweets out there, when he goes out there with his stubby little thumbs and continues to reiterate that we're going to punish American businesses simply for utilizing the law, which is something that he claimed, which is something that his supporters had followed him for. That is dangerous. That is setting a dark precedent and trend in this nation, that will be exceedingly difficult to overcome. And it will be seized upon by the left to be utilized to further entrench their power. Because, yes, folks, at some point in time, the left is going to recapture the reins of political power. In fact, folks, that is the entire reason that when you look at the way that our founding fathers had designed this constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic of ours to work, they included those checks and balances. They did not want there to be that type of power and control utilized in a way that was in stark opposition to the hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, because they realized that that was the path down the dark road to despotism, tyranny, but ultimately oppression. Those three elements are the three elements that we fought that long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence to achieve our independence. We did that to forge a new identity in which we recognize the natural order of things, or the natural law tenets that form the cornerstone of our Republican system of government. Unfortunately, neither side of the political aisle today, as I sit here speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, adheres to that. Neither side today is trying to implement that as their modus operandi, or their political position, or their political platform. Instead, we see that both sides of the political aisle are operating in such a way as to strip and deprive the American people of the power that is legitimately and rightfully theirs. And that is certainly not a path that we should be taking. That is certainly not the path that would MAGA, to steal the phrase from the Lion Branch Trump videos. But you see, they haven't taken the time to sit back and think about this. They haven't taken the time to analyze the clear and present danger that their chosen Messiah, the Quaftopia bringer himself, is threatening to unleash upon our country. They haven't taken the time because they don't consider it a real threat. Or they have lulled themselves into a false sense of security. But that brings up the words that great founding father, Benjamin Franklin, said. He said that those who sacrifice essential liberties for a fleeting or false sense of security deserve neither liberty nor security, and shall surely have neither. Well, is that the path that we are wanting to unleash upon ourselves in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours? Is that what we want to sit down to the up-and-coming generations and tell them we got rid of liberty because we were going to make America great again? Is that going to make sense, or is that going to be the height of hypocrisy, the height upon which we will be judged for all posterity? And do not think that the annals of history will judge us lightly. Do not think that history will look upon this as, oh, well, it was difficult time, those were difficult times in which they were living, and therefore they get a pass. No. History will be merciless in its judgment. History will judge us most harshly for our failure to live up to the duties, obligations, but above all responsibilities that are outlined for us in the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Folks, there really is no way to candy-coat that. There is no way to sugarcoat that. That is the harsh, stark reality that if we truly do want to restore American prosperity, we are going to have to awaken to it. We're going to have to embrace it. And we are going to have to start working towards practicable, real-world solutions that will ensure that our nation is once again strong, vibrant, robust, but above all free. Because if we lose our freedom, what are we left with? If we lose our rights, what, truthfully told, are we left with? The answer to that question is nothing. The answer to that question is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, we will be reduced to governmental servitude. Well, I don't want to be a servant of the government, because that is not what my forefathers came to this nation for. And my family has been here since 1635. They fought in the Revolution. They were part of that great, albeit tumultuous and turbulent time that gave birth to the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutionally endowed republic in the entire course of human events. That means in all of world history there has never been as secure, as open, nor as honest or free a society as that of these United States of America. Now, why would I belabor this point? Why would I continue to discuss this point? It is because this point goes directly to the heart of the matter of the problems that we are encountering in these United States of America. When we cede and delegate that which cannot be ceded and that which is non-delegable, so that we can have a leader who proclaims with no uncertainty that everything is negotiable, including our non-negotiable, fundamental, and inalienable God-given rights, we allow ourselves to draw ever more into the into that snare, into that trap that has been set by those nefarious forces that seek nothing short of the complete and utter annihilation of these United States of America as a nation and a people. We can ill afford that. That goes against who we are, but above all, who we want to be. Recall, we're going to tie this directly back to what that great founding father, Samuel Adams, said. Again, as I mentioned at the very outset of today's Solo Flight Special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program, that in order for us to succeed, in order for us to be a robust and vibrant republic, we must be a virtuous people. Well, that means that we have to assume a position where we're not just looking at what is there currently. It means that it cannot just be about mere instant gratification. We have to think about what is coming down the pike. The turnpike is up there, folks. And the price that we have to pay is vigilance and is the willingness to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. You see, with every right, liberty, and freedom that is endowed to us, it is couched with an equally powerful and equally important duty, obligation, and responsibility. Therefore, we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, are called upon, in no uncertain terms, to secure the blessings of liberty not only for ourselves, but our posterity. You see, that is why it is so drastically important that we foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding not only of our shared United States Constitution, but thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Because in so doing, we gain the ability to stand up to those charlatans who will stop short of nothing to strip and deprive us of those rights, to force us into the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression. And that ties directly back to what Donald Trump does when he goes on to the Twitter sphere using those stubby little thumbs of his to attack American industry and business. It's that he is setting it up to where he is going to be like the father of progressivism, who happened to be a Republican himself, Theodore Roosevelt. Using the auspices of government to line his own pockets and to destroy the competition. Cronyism is going to reach an all-time new height here in the United States. But it's not just his tweets against American business ventures that are concerning. It's also the way that he has gone forth and lambasted America's intelligence community. As you recall, my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I stated on one of our previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that there are the dangers of these external threats. Recall that Russia had even gone so far as to say that if Hillary Rotten Clinton won, that there would be nuclear war. That they offered to be election monitors in the United States. And then, of course, there was all of this malcontention swirling around a notion that maybe those email servers had been hacked by Russians. Now, the Lion Branch Trumpidians tried to sit back there in their tabernacle and say, well, Hillary brought this on herself. I'm not going to disagree with that point. She did bring it onto herself. She did allow that to come to fruition, and it should never have been allowed to come to fruition. But at the same time, we should not be encouraging the Russians who are not interested in the same things we are, who do not have our best interests at heart, to come in and hack political opponents and thereby manipulate our electoral process. Because again, that violates one of those fundamental pillars of who we are as a nation and a people. Self-responsibility and self-accountability working in tandem, thereby giving us self-determination. Do we want to be a self-determinate people, or do we want to bow down and be the puppets of an authoritarian dictator like Vladimir Putin? The answer to that question, which is rhetorical in nature, should be both open and obvious. We should not want to have anyone else be the domineering force that determines our fate and destiny. Because we have free will. We are a nation that was founded upon the ability to be self-responsible, the ability to be self-accountable or reliable, and thereby self-determinate. But what has happened in this modern, fast-paced society in which we live today? Are we so willing to give that all up for just political expediency and convenience? If that's the case, then our founding fathers would surely be ashamed of who and what we have become. They would scarcely be able to recognize what the United States is. And that is not something we should embrace. That is not something we should allow to come to fruition, because it is going to work against our best interests each and every time. You see, the onus of this duty, obligation, but above all responsibility falls on our shoulders in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. It's how it's always been. And it's because we are founded upon those natural law tenets which by their very nature are immutable, meaning timeless, meaning they are just as applicable today as they were at the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago, as God willing they will be some 235 years hence from today. But in order for any and all of that to come to fruition, in order for that lofty goal to become reality, we must be willing to stand up to any and all threats, irrespective of what side of the political aisle they come from. There really is no way around that. And the longer that we ignore it, and the longer that we continue to distance and divorce ourselves from the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, the much more difficult it is going to be to rein this nation back, to put an end to the chicanery and to the vile vice and corruption that has been running rampant in Washington, D.C. It means, ultimately, that we have to assume our role, our duty, our obligation, and enact our responsibilities without hesitation. Because we have been complacent for far too long. And that complacency has been the pill that has been poisoning us for far too long now. For generation after successive generation, it has allowed these dark, twisted, and maniacal forces in their diabolical schemes to attempt to fundamentally, drastically, permanently, and irreparably transform us away from a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic into some Orwellian nightmare, some frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist dystopia that has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. Why would we allow ourselves to embrace this? We shouldn't. And at some point, we are going to see, during the course of Trump's presidency, that perhaps this wedding himself to Russia is going to come back and haunt him. Because the intelligence community has come forth and stated that the orders came from on high, from the autocrat himself, from Vladimir Putin himself, to become involved in our election. That means it's tainted. We should have been robust in rejecting that as we would have in generations past. Now, that's not to say that propaganda is not a part of our electoral process and hasn't been since the beginning. It has. That's part of the reason why the election of 1800 was known as the Revolution of 1800. It was personalized. It was knockdown, drag-out, dirty fighting. But recall how America responded then to fears of foreign incursion. What ultimately brought about the end of the Federalist Party originally was their support for the Alien Sedition Act, was their support for a corrupt central government that was out of control, that had become rogue, tyrannical, and was ignoring the best interest of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. Well, that is the scenario that we find ourselves in 217 years later. And folks, recall, as we have oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, history is cyclical, meaning that it is repetitive, meaning that unlike what Karl Marx tried to say, it is not linearly progressive. Trump had insulted our intelligence community. And yes, while there is all of these concerns, or are all of these concerns with the NSA and what Snowden had shown, we find that Julian Assange, that so many are coming out and applauding as being this great force that helped inhibit the rise of a President Hillary Clinton, may not have been anything short of a Russian agent, attempting to engage in espionage and counter-espionage against the United States, particularly in the arena of cyber security and warfare. This is the unprecedented and uncharted territories in which we are entering, and President-elect Donald Trump has been going forth and basically applauding Putin. But then at the same time saying that, well, let there be an arms race, as if he wants to rekindle and reignite the strains of the last Cold War. Now, folks, to whose benefit does that work? Whom will be the beneficiary of that? Whose best interest will that really play out to? Nobody. Because we are all the losers when it comes to that sort of insanity, to that sort of chicanery, and the biggest loser of them all will be President-elect Donald J. Trump. Mark my words. We cannot play fast and loose with our national security. We cannot allow these external threats and forces to define our system of polity, because that is the most assured way for our nation to collapse. We have to stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity and reject these threats, both from within and from outside the United States. We are going to have to rebuild our strength of character. We are going to have to regain what it is that drove us to being a great people in the first place. And that means that we're going to have to return to the Constitution. Now, none of the political actors out there, save for a precious few, are even remotely discussing the application and the greatness of our shared Constitution. They're not discussing it because they realize that the approach that they are taking now stands in stark opposition to it, is diametrically opposed to the Constitution, which is the very thing that made this nation strong, robust, and free in the first place. And we simply cannot afford to abandon that, but that means it is time that we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, come together and hold our politicians' feet to the fire, that we hold leadership accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. But the honeymoon period for the Lion Branch Trumpidians congregating in their Trumpidian tabernacle has not ended yet. They continue to be willfully blind to the ugly, dark, twisted truth that is unfurling before the shocked and horrified eyes of the nation. But it is the truth. And the truth always has a way of shining through. The truth always comes in to be what the people accept. It's as the great philosopher Aristotle said in his Art of Rhetoric, that people are essentially hardwired to accept the truth. And therefore, those who are going to use duplicity, those who are going to seed in an era of deceit, must use duress, must use tactics of fear-mongering, manipulation, and intellectual disingenuousness to see their vision come to fruition, because they know deep down that if they tried to compete in the free marketplace of ideas with what their true intentions and purposes were, that they would fall to defeat each and every time, because it would be theft by any other name. That is literally what we face right now. And it is why we said that Donald Trump is not who he claims to be. Recall that he said that it's the Republican Party, not the Conservative Party. We see that they're moving towards that. We see that he has embraced this stimulus spending plan that would bleed this nation dry of $1 trillion over the course of the next 10 years. That's not conservative. But recall, it's not the Conservative Party, according to Trump. That's not who we are. That's not who we want to be anymore. He was essentially going out there and telling us that we had no room to be that. Why? To what purpose? To what end goal? To what achievement will that gain for anyone in these United States of America? The answer is it's not going to achieve anything for anyone. That it is going to work to our great detriment each and every time. But folks, we can overcome this, just as we have overcome every hurdle, obstacle, and adversity that has been placed in our path during our relatively brief yet illustrious history. And the way that we overcome it is to go back to basics. That's what Jeremy has said, that's what I have said, that's what we will all continue to say. And basics in the United States of America is none other than our shared Constitution. By returning to the Constitution, by strictly adhering to the clear and concise language that is contained within the four corners of that sacred document, we can rein this government back in. We can demand that we get back to a modicum of sanity. And if you really want to fix the economy, you're going to have to do it through the Constitution. You see, folks, the message that we have here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is designed to uplift you. It is designed to empower you. But it means that you must foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of not only our shared United States Constitution, but also our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Well, the way you do that is to go back to the Constitution. That's literally all it takes. And with that said, folks, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send back the flight attendant for one last round of alcohol. Folks, she is not going to bamboozle you. She is not even going to go on Twitter. She's just there to pour some alcohol for you. And thus, just accept it. As always, folks, I'm your Captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them either here in our YouTube page, in the comment section here, or on our Google Plus page, or on our Facebook page. And on top of that, we invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle